at UBC on Nile Avenue in the heart of Kampala. And every Friday we come to you with the Pan-African Friday, an episode in which we discuss a lot of things about Africa, issues that concern the African way of life, and things, how they are being done, and how we wish they would be done on this African continent. And as usual, in the studio, I'm always with my two usual suspects, Ndugu Rugarama and Sister Rachel, to take us through the rest of 1 or 2 hours here. Apparently today we have been informed of the Manifesto Week, the NRM Manifesto Week, which will be coming your way anytime as on screen. And when it does happen, we'll let you know, and definitely we'll have it live all the way from the office of the President's office at the office of the Prime Minister and the office of the President, just next to us here in Parliament. So when that happens, we'll definitely bring it to your sets, and we'll give way along the program as it happens. Meanwhile, before that happens in the studio, we'll get to discuss a lot of things. Now, particularly for today, we are supposed to be looking at the disasters, especially in Africa, how we manage these disasters, when these disasters happen, and as disasters, a new phenomenon, disasters, something that we have lived with, or it is also one thing which is as new as anything. But for me, I believe it is not a new thing, and of course, you will also be able to interact with us if you are online, or be able to get your views. And when you send us your views, you also tell us your name and where you are communicating from. Of course, we shall be able to know, given the number that you'll be using on WhatsApp, but it's also good to tell us your name wherever you are. But also appreciate your time whenever you are with us on whichever platform that you do follow us. So for now, let me have my usual panelists introduce themselves, and then definitely we shall rush off to the program, knowing that we could be interrupted along the way. Ndugu Rugarama.
Thank you so much, Comrade Mtuta, and good morning to you. Good morning to dear Sister Takari. Good morning to you, everybody who is watching us, and thank you so much for taking off time to be with us this morning. My name is Rugarama, Comrade Rugarama Daniel, for the record. I'm the chairman of the Pan-African Movement Uganda, and so many other things which we shall get to know probably as we progress. Those who already know me for other things as well. And are we only supposed to introduce ourselves?
Yeah, for now, because then we'll have to move fast, because time is not going to be on our side. Sister Rachel.
My name is Rachel Takari. I'm the Chief News Editor at UBC Radio, and an ardent Pan-Africanist. That's as far as I'll go this time.
Yeah, of course, that's very important, of course, for a person to be known, so that, because sometimes people complain, we know you Mtuta, but who are the other people? But of course, we're always introducing ourselves here. But for me, the name Mtuta, apparently, other than Rugarama and maybe Takali, we don't have many Mtutas here. But even Takali, I think, is not. Rugarama could be many, but not Takali is an Mtuta. So I think we have an age over that. Now, this issue of disasters, when you talk of disasters, I think for me, coming from all the way Bududa, I think I can be a disaster, a victim myself at one point. But I grew up being told, especially when we're talking about Bududa, we're talking about landslides. People sometimes talk of flooding. I don't think we have flooding, but we have landslides. Because why we don't experience flooding in that area is because the water originates from there. So the flooding happens in the lower parts of Bugisu, but not in the highlands. And for me, I think most of my time I stayed both in the highlands and the lowlands, fine. But when you talk about the most prone areas are in the highlands. So maybe that also the problem that while in the highlands people are experiencing landslides down streams, people are experiencing flooding, and it happens. You know, in Africa, for example, we have a lot of areas of flooding in the other parts of the south of Africa, and then we have the sliding, especially in mountain areas. Is this something which is new, or we are now looking at the new the paradigm shift now in the areas of climate change? That climate change has also come with a lot of challenges and new things that never were supposed to be known. Is this also part of the climate change? Because we are talking now when we have had landslides in Rwanda, we have had the landslides even in the city in Congo. We have also had flooding yesterday. The river Katonga cut off, I think, rain mud and cut off the bridge. So so what is happening? Is this a new thing coming up, or it is something that we have lived with, Rachel?
Disasters are not new, not by a long shot. They've been part of human history since the foundation of time, but definitely they've been made worse by human activity. It's quite well documented that some of these more important disasters of old, such as drought, have been there for a very long time. The only difference is that at this time, human activity has included, for example, occupying the river banks.
So you're talking about the human factor now?
Yes. The human factor is very critical in causing this whole issue to rise to unprecedented levels. The river you're talking about, Katonga, it's in the neighborhood of a swamp, which swamp has been infested by rice growing and build up permanent structures. So as a result, many of these things get in the way of the natural flow of some of these water bodies. That in return has resulted in things such as floods and other related misfortunes. But going further afield to places such as Congo at this time, DRC, we know that the human conflict in that place really disadvantages the population and causes them to be in artificial settlements, and really causes vulnerability that would not have been true had they been in a normal situation. But unfortunately, of the latest disasters in this particular area, DRC has borne the brunt. At least 400 bodies were recovered from the mud. And disaster, of course, is not a new thing in that place. You remember Virunga, not very long ago. There is an active volcano there. It also, from time to time, does its thing. The latest disaster has also extended its arms into Rwanda, where the people in the highlands have also suffered at least 100 casualties. Uganda, not so much in the recent situation, where about 20 lost their lives. It doesn't make it any less tragic. But what we're trying to say is that the way the population pressure, there are a number of factors, but population pressure is very important when you look at the places that in Rwanda and in Uganda. These are places that have a high population density, among other things because there's not that much land, and yet it is fertile. And what happens in the traditional way of doing things, a father keeps handing down the same piece of land that is fragmented. The president is on record talking about land fragmentation. It makes people refarm the same land that is depleted over time, and that land is easy to be carried away when there are floods and so on. But human settlements, in the way of what would have been natural interventions, is a very important cause. The tree felling at record levels. We know how much in this country, for example, the tree cover has shrunk to miserable figures. And it is not expected to recover in the short term because the population growth has appreciated rather rapidly. But when trees are felled indiscriminately, as is the case at this time, they tell us, the scientists, that in turn, we cannot have the seasons as they were in times past. And if they come in an extreme fashion. There are cases where the rains have come and refused to recede until homesteads are washed away and cars are also washed away and things like that. I'm going roundabout to say that these things have been with us since time immemorial, but human activity has rapidly, accelerated the problem. In Uganda, of course, the disasters vary from region to region. When you're talking about places such as Turkey, their main problem is earthquakes. Earthquakes is not so much a major problem on this continent, but ours, we have drought, we have famine, we have floods, we have mudslides, we have landslides. But when you're talking about artificial disasters, we have war and conflict. War and conflict causes people to be displaced from those positions they would otherwise have assumed to protect themselves. But, Brother Mututa, even before I leave this argument, there is the issue of poverty. I think poverty in itself is a disaster. The number one disaster in Africa is poverty.
Yeah, but of course it's a vicious cycle. Well, those you have mentioned are contributory.
True. But the principal cause is extreme poverty. The reason why people infest or invade forests and take down all the forest cover is to create additional farmlands, is to create additional spaces for shelter and so on and so forth, because they don't have their own lands.
But I think I'll come in on that one. We all have moved in this country, at least to the great extent. And we have seen places where you can move, you drive kilometers without a human being.
True.
But you have also come to places like in Maibududa, where I come from, where you have a house over another and over another. Now, for me, I believe it is the way of management, how we manage people. Because if there is free land somewhere, open land, and the people are squeezed somewhere so much.
But you know what happened in Bududa when they said, no, we will not go to?
Yeah, but and why they don't go is because if I'm moving from point A to point B, there must be some incentive. That the life I'm going to live in the other place is relatively better than what I'm living here.
And what is preventing the incentives from being in place?
Management.
Without resources?
Of course, management, including you manage resources. So in other words, we are saying there must be a deliberate policy by government. And we are not only talking about the government of Uganda. We are looking at the African policies in terms of housing, in terms of settlement, that people can be settled where they are not prone to disasters. But if you are going to live, because even now when you move around Kampala, and that's one of the problems that I think DRC faced during this recent landslide, is because of the housing plan, the planning, that people are so much packed from these houses and making the land saggy and moving away. So the whole thing is how we plan our populations. Are we going to have people still being packed in Kampala here? You find a person has built a house here, another one is building a house next, but with the toilet facing the compound on this one. That kind of thing. But I think the most important thing here was to look at how we can plan our populations. It doesn't cost us much to do that, but it costs us everything if we do without that. Of course, Ndugu Rugarama was going to say something before we continue.
Thank you so much once again. Let me start like this as far as this debate is concerned. One is that Africa our problem is not space.
Sure.
The issue of congestion shouldn't come into debate, but it does. Why? It does because of what you, Mututa, and Sister Rachel have just talked about, the disaster, and the biggest disaster being poverty. Now, I want to qualify that. In my opinion, with all due respect to whoever deserves the respect, the biggest disaster is the poverty of the mind, which gives birth to a leadership crisis. That you can have a huge space in a country like Uganda where we have got expanse of spaces, and you have got other areas which are congested, heavily congested. The leadership does not prevail to manage how houses are built because we are advancing. At the same time, regulate the way agriculture is conducted, improvise better ways of managing agriculture, planting trees that can hold the soil, make it firm, with increased, of course, population. You will impact on the soil by people constructing houses and increasing cultivation and making the soil a bit weak. Now, all those boil down to leadership. Who is in charge of the people? People must be shown leadership. Africa, generally speaking, the rough estimate is that you can get the entire China, get America, get some, I think, Europe, fit it into Africa, and still have some balance here and there, if my memory serves me right. Meaning, therefore, that if Africa is at are we at 1.3, 1.4, around there, billion people? Now, you've got other countries like China, just a country, you can imagine, we're a continent now. But China, which is well above us, by far. India, well above us. Now, if you got all those, their area space is not like ours. So what is the argument about space? Vis-a-vis population. It doesn't work that way.
Sure.
It means, therefore, we go back to what Chinua Achebe has always talked about, especially in his book, The Problem of Nigeria, which I want to say is the problem of Africa. You can generalize his findings, is leadership. Now, all that well said. Truth of the matter is that when we go back to our geography lessons, this white man's colonial education probably was not, after all, very useless, although to a great extent
it's not as bad
as we may want to think. Certainly, of course, it pushes you to a certain level of appreciating issues, but I agree with those who criticize it, because criticism are not bad after all. You know, criticism also give us where we should improve.
Yeah, but of course the other reason on that was that what will be, like she says, what will be the alternative?
Okay, now, of course, for us, we had our original education system, and we were simply rudely interrupted. So the truth of the matter is that we are not looking for any alternatives, and I want to believe, because even before the dawn of colonialism, we had the universities of Timbuktu, which were largely organic universities. So had we not been interfered with, certainly, I want to believe that we would have progressed, and that organic education system of ours would have resulted, now would be at a much higher level, probably much higher than where the colonial education system has put us. That notwithstanding, our geography lessons, like I was saying, will tell you that weather is the study of the current situation, circumstances around you. You say, this weather is very cold now. That's understandable. And weather changes. It can change anytime, any minute. However, the definition of climate is that it is the study of the circumstances of a given geographical area over a long period of time, in majority of the cases more than 1 year. Now, where does that take us? It takes us to a point whereby we say that we cannot be talking about natural disasters in light of the fact that we were unaware. No, in majority of the cases is that we have studied how people have lived over the ages, and we are aware that this place, for instance, floods, Katonga. We have just been talking about Katonga. Who doesn't know, including our engineers in UNRWA, that Katonga is largely a wetland?
But I'm told it is flooding because people have been excavating sand from the place.
And building in there.
Thank you so,
and planting in there.
Thank you so much. Who in UNRWA, NEMA, all those agencies, who didn't know that the Chinese in cahoots with some government officials were extracting sand? Who doesn't know that?
Because
two, who is not aware that we have had political fights over that area, the Rwera area, this Katonga, where the water has cut off the road, not for the first time, by the way. This time it could have been at a different magnitude, but we have had that road, first of all, sinking, especially when the vehicles are many and heavy loads during Christmas, Easter festivals, and we have had UNRWA come to do emergency. The nature, the quality of work they do in my assessment is questionable. Why? What is the age of that road?
So
what is the tonnage that moves on that road? In other words, I am saying in disaster management capabilities of Africa generally and Uganda in particular, the principle of data gathering, data usage and management is very critical. We seem not to gather data properly, scientific data. Even when we gather it, we seem not to apply it correctly to address some of the issues and even forecast that if, for instance, the number of vehicles moving on this road, whose age is 15 years, and it was built to last 20 years.
You have said it.
Yes.
Which is very cardinal to not only to Uganda per se, but generally the African problem. When you look at the African problem, is that we, of course, at some point, people think sometimes some of us are soft on the West, but we are saying no. I think might just we blame the West. Let's also look at ourselves. This issue of corruption, because if people were excavating sand and planting rice in the Rwera, it doesn't come from nowhere. Someone must have given a license to someone must have given a land title to someone must be getting money from someone.
Don't even forget, let me just give you information there, by the way. There is a one pastor, where it is public information, of course, when you win a case in court and you can access the judgment now, even online, who took NEMA to court, and he was awarded in billions because he had a license.
Yes.
You see, he was carrying out activity.
The riverbank.
Yes, he was carrying out activity
on a massive scale.
In line with the license which he got.
On riverbank.
He had a land title. What I'm saying is public knowledge. It is there.
Yeah, but of course now the other thing, the other question that comes now into play.
Then NEMA stopped him. When it stopped him, he took NEMA to court and he beat NEMA hands down. I think later, of course, when they appeared, because my colleague is there, she told me they appeared. They appeared and they said, no, we cannot pay this.
That brings me to some thinking. Yeah? You now have even men and women, of course, they're not only men and ladies who are on the bench, who are presiding over some of these cases. There is the law, what is provided in the law, but there is also the issue of patriotism.
That's very critical. You see, all these things we are talking about, the point, the rallying point should be patriotism, Pan-Africanism. We are in short supply of patriots. We are in short, and across the board, by the way. Because you see, even if you go to the engineering body, even if you go to the legal fraternity, even if you go to civil service, and this is even worse, by the way, one of the 11 hindrances to African development, as pointed out by His Excellency the President and our patron, Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, is a weak, disorganized, demotivated, de-energized civil service. Now, you see, civil service is a critical force if a country, if a society, a country for that matter, must move forward. Now, when you get a civil service which is demotivated, lacking in leadership, is not patriotic, they lack all Pan-African credentials, you are not going to have any development of that particular country to talk about.
What is the common point here? You have the civil service, and you have also the leadership, the government. Of course, the civil service is part of the government. But we're also talking about the African problem of the leadership. I think patriotism is contagious, and it comes from one center to the rest of the centers. You may not isolate one group from the other. Now, these problems compounded are what we are seeing here. That the mindset, when you get into public office, what is expected of you? Because these issues of now the corruption we are looking at, of course, giving the example of Lwera and many other examples across Africa, is the issue of corruption. That someone is failing to do his part ethically because there is some exchange of money involved to keep their minds down. And what happens now, the common disaster affecting everyone because someone has benefited. Now, Rachel, do you think is the problem of the administration, is the problem of those in the administration? Is it the problem of policy? Is it a problem of behavior, of value, of contact?
We have said many times here that the operating system of the African superstate, if you will, is faulty. Not only is it faulty, it's irredeemable.
That's dangerous.
Terrible.
Yes. The software we are dealing with is irredeemable. In other words...
You can't reboot.
No. Not successfully.
No, you don't reboot a faulty thing. It's already faulty.
You've been rebooting all these years.
Yeah.
It keeps... Because there is garbage in...
And then the garbage there out.
Yeah, whether you reboot. Why is this software irredeemable? Because it is incapable of serving you. It serves someone else, paka last. The software that you require has not made it to your machine. So whether you work the machine from morning to sunset, whether you increase the RAM, this software is irredeemable.
Because we have had countries like the Asian tigers.
Yes.
These guys, at one point, they were also receiving aid like many of African countries.
Yes, they replaced the software.
In 25 years, they stopped receiving that aid. Most of them
for Singapore, even Malaysia was saying, I don't know where to put this tiny country. I'm really not willing to continue to govern it. You know, it was such a burden. Look at Singapore.
Those people redid the software. They said, look, the software we have now serves the colonizer. there is no amount of effort that can redeem the African state with this software. I'll give you an example. We are now talking about these most recent disasters in Eastern Africa. Why is it that it is the same dynamics in Uganda, in DRC, and in Rwanda?
Same causes, same reason, same
Why
destruction.
is it the dynamics are the same? The interventions are wanting. The solutions don't exist.
The roads are, you know, in the news when you
Priorities
are
are misplaced.
when you are writing a news text, you will say the aid to these places has been hampered because of bad weather and infrastructure.
Roads. You've been talking about roads are bad since the colonizer left. In our case, 60 years, more than
Plus,
60 years
yes.
ago. Now, the problem is that we did not appreciate at the time that they had left us this machine whose software will serve them until we redo this software. We have to discard this thing. Because look at, we are always intervening in already bad situations. What is wrong with developing meaningful interventions to cure these problems?
I'll give you an example.
That is our way of doing things. We are always reactive. Why? So it cannot be that it is the immediate leadership of Uganda, for example, only. It cannot be that it's the immediate leadership of DRC only, or of Rwanda. These are spillovers from past administrations. So the software, the blueprint from which we read cannot serve us. The fact that our leaders do not appreciate that you cannot build a new Africa with the old approach is the reason for our problems. Because why is it that resource allocation remains amazing? For example, if you look at DRC and you look at Uganda, and the reason we're harping on this is because we've suffered floods at about the same time. But resource allocation, if you're going to the militaries of Rwanda, it is it is decent. If you go to the military of Uganda, it is decent on account of resource allocation. If you go to the military of DRC, well, they have failed to quell certain uprisings because of the sheer mass of their land, of the land they occupy. But what I'm trying to say is that we allocate a lot of resources to military power. We don't give as much money to disaster and its mitigation.
Yeah, because I know the countries, the Himalayas, which are the high places, where governments over time have successfully now put in place early warning systems.
Because they put the money there.
Yes.
But look, allow me to interrupt you. The reason why these states of ours do not give that much money to that is because they're using the colonial blueprint that says military might answers all. It was the emphasis of the colonizer to boost our military capacity to protect his interests. We are still doing that. Even when people have no food to eat and there is really no war, there are countries on this African continent that have not had any war since independence or before independence in living memory. But they are also not making any progress because they are not putting money in areas that will cause meaningful growth. So it is not because DRC or Uganda or Rwanda have had conflicts in the recent past. It's not the reason why they're putting a lot of money in their militaries. It is the colonial order that recruited the people of Uganda, or the people they found at that time, to make sure they protect their interests with limb and with blood. It is unjustifiable for a country that is not immediately threatened by anybody or anyone not to have meaningful disaster preparation, for example.
Yeah, because that comes in handy. Remember the other time when the foreign minister of South Africa was having I think it was a press conference, after having a press conference with the Blinken. She said she has had to have said sometimes and many times we are told what to do. Now, if they are going to tell you what to do, that comes as a package. it will mean that it comes with the capacity to build your capacity militarily. We say we're going to give you this equipment, this equipment, this equipment, but you will buy this equipment, this equipment. In other words,
it shouldn't surprise you that at some point your army will be the one protecting their interests in another part.
I mean, Rwanda is in the other West African country.
And so is Uganda in other parts.
Yes.
So it is the colonial order. The British perfected the art of propaganda, indoctrination.
Because
where they make you believe this is for your good, they'll give you aid to build your military capacity that you don't need. Of course, Uganda does. But the African states that are not threatened by anybody. So there is no need to place emphasis on military power. But they do, because by colonial order, at some point, if he needs you to suppress your neighbor, because he's the one who equipped you, you will comply.
Yeah.
So we are reading from an irredeemable script, is really what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, but that comes with the high cost, especially when it comes to the Africa we're talking about. In moments ago, when we were talking about the Asian tigers, said that these guys, they stopped the aid. But Africa, for example, you look at us, ourselves, 60 years plus of independence, but we're still planning, we're still negotiating the borrowing.
Because if you look at countries like Switzerland, or Costa Rica, I believe, they don't have a standing army. They don't need one. Nobody's threatening them. But for us, the colonial mentality says you always have to have armed men. First of all, they serve the colonizer to put you down or to put your neighbor down, depending on what their interests are. Then you will use it yourself to suppress your own people. Yourself.
Fact, yes.
To make, at the end of the day, the colonizer runs home with your goods as you fight your neighbor with his guns. So what? We cannot intervene in those things that matter to us because we are using a colonizer's script.
Ndugu Rugarama, Nani says,
Chihombori, Dr. Arkana,
says that you can replace a president today with another president, with another president, with another president, but you are not going to make any change, sustainable change in Africa, and she's very cutting on that, until we have changed the system under which these people operate.
I agree completely. I agree. And our sister, Dr. Arkana Chihombori, ambassador, her views about the software that we use as a continent are not are well shared.
Are you saying?
Because when you look at Comrade Joshua Maponga, who were debating with him here, and his views about the software which we use here on the African continent, when you look at the views of our senior brother, Piero Lumumba, about the software, we all are in agreement, and my sister Takari here has also brought it home, that the software which we use on the African continent to run many things, including the army, is in such a format that it needs no rebooting. We just need to overhaul it completely and also adopt a new software if we must make any meaningful changes. Now, in a situation like West Africa, what the French did is by their pact for continuation of colonialism, all the countries that were under the direct colonial rule before regaining independence were structured in such a way at the departure of the physical presence of the Frenchman that the armies, the police, the civil service, everything is going to be tailored, including the banking and telecommunication, is going to be tailored and on the auspices of the French, the central banking system of all those countries is in Paris. The armies, the armaments, the training. Because you see, this is what happens. In disaster management, by the way, in other jurisprudences, and I've seen Uganda is trying to go there, which is a very good step. Armies are used to manage disasters and even prevent. You remember when we had the wheat on our Lake Victoria. It is the engineering brigade, the army, the marine, something like that in combination. There's a unit in the UPDF which managed that weed, and it is no longer a menace. Now that was a plus. At the same time, we have had locusts in eastern part. They were coming from Kenya, and they entered, of course, those ones don't need any passports, so don't ask me how they entered there. They just cut across. Now, and we know what locusts can do, by the way, because it's not the first time that Uganda and the East African region has experienced locusts. Now, I want also to give credit to the East African community and beyond East Africa. We have IGAD. Now, the initial IGAD, it has just taken on new format, new roles. But the initial IGAD, by the way, was formed solely for purposes of averting those called natural disasters. That if it is drought, and drought would be okay, it's a natural disaster. But you see, it's exacerbated by the nomadic way of the people who, for instance, are here in the Horn of Africa, because majorly, the majority of those are not agriculturists, they are not farmers, they are cattle keepers. Now, they are going, there is an extension of the agriculturists who have invaded areas that were hitherto for cattle keepers. But at the same time, look at that horn, the entire Horn of Africa. Look at the Djibouti, look at Somalia, look at this Ethiopia, all that, cut through, come to Kenya, you know? Although you have got the nomads there, but at the same time, you have got some sketches of the farmers, agriculturists. But what is of critical importance is that we have got instability. Now what happens is that people are not going to concentrate on herding their cows. They are not going to concentrate on growing the food. And because they are fighting, if they are not fighting, they are being fought, and therefore the consistency to remain to do what you are supposed to do is not there. As a consequence, we talk about natural disasters, which are famine, drought, poverty. Because you see, you are not engaged in any meaningful economic activity. So, is it not therefore proper for some of us who want to think beyond the box to say that the majority of the so-called natural disasters are actually man-made engineered disasters? Will you be unreasonable to carry out that argument and sustain it? My opinion is you will not be, because we have for a given time now seen that the activities of IGAD have been hampered by and of course that one also goes into the invisible hand. We have got these structures. When you look at the activities of IGAD, when you look, of course, they will talk about finances and whatever, but you go back to what William Ruto, the president of Kenya, was saying. Is it not embarrassing that us, the entire 54 countries of Africa, who some countries actually struggle to pay their subscription. I don't know if it is struggle or it is the will. You know, those two are not the same. You may have the capacity, but you are not willing to pay the subscription. Is it not embarrassing that we are looking beyond Africa to merely get an $84 billion dollars to get Somalia out of her quagmire? He posed that question. Now, when you see what Somalia is suffering, yes, there are countries which have done their bits. Uganda has done her bit, and I think maybe she has also gone a little bit to an extent. And of course, given the thinking, the Pan-African thinking of the leadership, what they are doing in Somalia is probably over and above. We are not used to seeing countries do that, especially when they are not looking for certain favors, be it economics or otherwise. Now, at the end of the day, therefore, my take is that what Chombori, the question which you posed, was talking about and has from time and again talked about, and her views were shared by all well-meaning scholars and the ardent students of history, is that we must, and I have said this also before, we must carry out an ideological revolution. Our problem, the biggest disaster that we experience, which has affected other areas where we say we are experiencing disasters in famine, disaster in floods, disaster in the drought, disaster in the biggest of the disasters, in my opinion, is the ideological disaster, whereby our thinking has been seriously compromised. It is captured by imperialism. We do not think outside the box. Everything is tailored around United Nations and her agencies for purposes. We are now looking at the United Nations as if it is a god who is going to redeem us from hunger, even when we know we need to strengthen food supply chains. That if, for instance, in the region of Karamoja, there is suspected, because we shouldn't also wait for situations whereby there are issues in a part of Uganda, which is a fertile area, and then we begin talking about relief food from Prime Minister's office, which also has got problems. God save that ministry. We need to have to rely on our data. We collect data correctly. We put in place early warning systems. We respect them, and we must do proper monitoring and evaluation.
You are talking about issues that really mean a lot to the African people. But also the same issues are the very problems that have brought us as Africans where we are. Because if you are talking about these disasters, then poverty, then disease, all these things are chained up. You just need to trigger one, and then you have the next one, the next one. Where when you fail to manage the resources, like you are giving examples of Somalia, that horn, if the struggle is about resources, if you fail to have these resources well allocated and well managed, definitely you are going to have war, you are going to have violence. Now from violence you are going to create a homeless society. From the homeless society you are going to have poverty, and from poverty, disease, famine, all these things will be compounded. So I think it goes back to the African problem of leadership now. Are we saying that African presidents, African leaders, because we have presidents, we have prime ministers, we have kings, are these only peg boys to some other arrangement, or are they able to do things that is going to move this continent to the next level? But when we come back from the break, which we are now going into, we'll be looking at this. If are the leaders that we have our leaders, or they are someone's extended staff for their own interests? When we come back, please don't go away. These are issues that we are going to be looking at, and you can also join us in that discussion, because we will be soon flashing a number on the screen which you will follow us, and we can be in discussion. Thank you. Oh, don't go away. We shall be back shortly.
Juko.
Yo.
Check the shopping, man. What's your secret?
Haven't you heard of the parish development model, PDM?
Yes, I did, but I thought it was just a talk.
No, Sebatia. It is real. I and a few friends together formed a circle, accessed money from the PDM, invested in a portrait project, and now things are moving.
Juko. I thought I was one of your friends.
You are.
But you left me behind.
I didn't leave you in poverty. But what you do, just visit your LC2 chairperson and your parish chief and start the process of economic transformation. Just like that. The parish development model is an initiative from the government of Uganda through the Ministry of Local Government designed to transform all lives of Ugandans for the better. PDM, my parish, my development, my life.
One-on-one with Michael Jordan Lukomwa.
A weekly face-to-face conversation focusing on accountability, inspiration, information, and sensitization of the public from the various sources, such as inspirational profiles.
Having disability is not inability.
Professional guidance.
There is no special antiretroviral therapy that is given specifically for discordant couples.
And of course, politics.
Don't you see anywhere that you would give a credit in the fight against COVID?
My role as the owner of the country is not to, be preoccupied by giving credit to my servant.
We have said that if we are to talk to General Museveni, there must be certain conditions in place.
Is it true that you paid 5 million shillings to MPs that voted for Anita Monga and Tayebo?
That is laughable. Why would we pay when we have nominated them as SEC?
Every party has been represented in Uganda's parliament for 10 years. We only by one MP, you yourself and my daughter, Susan.
Every Friday 9 p.m. it's One-on-One with Michael Jordan Lukomwa on UBC TV, inspiring Uganda.
Coming soon on UBC.
Well, some of us think that twakoa, stress to town, Monica, yes? I don't know, why do we even need these values, honestly? If I'm making my money and I have the things I want, do I need the values, doctor?
Yes, of course, because you realize that values play a very significant part in the society.
Did you know that Uganda had national values? Here on Your Space, we talk about things in relation to values, to morality. What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to respect humanity?
Humanity is literally you being born a human being.
Human being is born equal in rights and dignity. Dignity, which means that human being should be respected, that human being should be treated with fairness, that human being should be brought up as a responsible person.
This is your space.
Yes, this is my space.
This is it, your space.
Yes, it is your space.
Your space gives you the opportunity to express your thoughts and express your views about each and everything like this under the sun.
The stage is a world of entertainment. Get the latest entertainment, lifestyle, events and activities. Chats with celebrities that make headlines.
It's your girl Zari, Mama Tifa. I'm in town, I'm in Uganda.
It's showbiz. Join me, Mary. I intend to connect you to a lot of fun. Cause I know you want it, you love it, you enjoy it. All on Power Flavor Magazine, reloaded for you right here on UBC. Don't miss out every Saturday, 12 p.m.
Yeah, welcome back from that short break. Before we went off the screen, we were talking about the leadership in Africa. Is it that the leadership in Africa that has failed Africa to move forward, or it is the software we're talking about that has hampered even the leadership that be there to move ahead? For example, we have been talking about the issue of economics. One is going to tell you that to be able to move away from the poverty bracket, one must be earning $1 every day, or $5 a day. Now, when you ask my grandmother in the village, who has food from her garden, who has a land on her name, who has cows, who has animals she's keeping. The last time she held $1 in her hands, it has never been there. But when you look at the man without $1 in the city of New York or in London, that guy will have nothing. So you are measuring this same person plus a Ugandan or an African who cannot have $1, but he has other things that are more than $1. So even the rating alone is a problem. And so are we saying that the leadership of Africa should also be reorganized in such a way that to be able to measure up to the new challenges like we have seen happening with the Chinese and other countries that are saying, you know, I think we have been fooled for enough. And we talked about the Asian tigers. At one point they had to say, no, I think this is enough. We cannot continue moving this way until we decide our own path. Otherwise, we are not going anywhere.
The truth of the matter is that, especially when you go back to your example of the tiger economies, Malaysia, Singapore, etc., Korea, the leadership question is at the heart. Because when you read, for instance, from the book, From Third World to First World by Lee Kui, that famous Prime Minister or President of Singapore, you realize the fact that it was a mixture. The leadership was a mixture of carrot and stick. That
to move a person from Bududa to where you want to take
where are you showing?
Exactly.
I one time went to, is it Chiriandongo area?
Yes.
And I saw the houses which they said were meant for people from Elgon region.
Exactly.
These white iron sheets, and maybe they were even using these natural sticks and that kind of stuff. There was nothing to admire from that. But in Asia, and you see, when I bring in the example of Asia, people tend to think that that is now Asia. No, we are talking about benchmarking.
Yes.
Even including
that's the common word.
When we get some commercial break here, we will get the intervention of people like Ruatoro here, our brother. The point really is that anybody who is at a certain level of and desires to appreciate some of these things will appreciate them in this way. That let's not hide our heads like ostriches in the sand and pretend that we are not the rest of the body is not being seen. The truth of the matter is that these things are doable, if I may use that English. They are doable. It's not rocket science that we are talking about here. If we say leadership, Prime Minister's office, you are in charge of making sure that you settle people from Bududa. I don't want to hear this story of the people from Mount Elgon have actually refused. How? What are you saying? Even the incentives we are talking about really are not given to them. Because you see, we know the attachments that usually people have to the area where their great-grandfathers are buried. We know that for a fact. But you cannot equate that to their eventual death as well and with their children. Because at the end of the day, we have the data the data which is going to inform you that in a period of, say, 15 years, 10 years, where you are seated, unless by other means, you are going to have mudslides. And indeed, the prediction is that those happen at that given time, and people die. And then we go on radio, we come here on TV, and then we say we send condolences, and then government officials fly in choppers, and then they give moving eulogies and beautiful speeches. This must stop. So at the end of the day, and this is the argument we are making, at the end of the day, some of the so-called natural disasters are actually energized by the mistakes. Some of the mistakes are actually deliberate from the wananchi. There is no way we can be discussing that the travelers from Western Uganda have been cut off for a whole 3 days simply because in Rwera, the entire road has been washed away. When we knew clearly, and if you ask those guys in UNRWA, in conjunction with NEMA, they will tell you that we expected it. And some will even say it mutedly. They will say, me, I can't talk. You know, I'm a chisati, I'm a small man. How do I talk? My bosses will say I'm bringing a rogezi. So at the end of the day, you will find that we are sacrificing this country at the altar of the big boys and the big girls in government offices, simply because we have to keep our jobs with the small people, technical people. They have got this data, they have got these predictions, but because they are a section of unpatriotic and Pan-African people holding big offices, some of these things actually don't move. Because just to look at all the disasters, for instance, if we wanted, on the African continent. You see, in Mozambique, there were floods. And they were expected the floods were going to be there.
Exactly.
Some of these, we have got early warning systems, by the way. You forget about IGAD now. IGAD is ours now here. You know, it has been expanding, of course. But as the African Union, we have got an entire section that deals with managing some of these disasters. Yes, you can argue that you see majority of the equipment they use and some of the technical staff, they are actually not Africans. It doesn't pay if you can have somebody looking like you, and we have said this one here before, but who is not you. So at the end of the day, we are saying, look, certain aspects of the natural disasters are actually natural disasters. The biggest disaster that causes the other disasters to happen and flourish is the disaster of the mind. But also, let me not leave this point without bringing out the issue of the permanent. We have got permanent international disaster management agencies stationed on the African continent. And they will do everything possible to look out. If they will not find any disaster, then they are also going to create a disaster. I will come to that at a later stage if I'm given opportunity.
Okay. Rachel, you were saying something about this issue.
The issue of disasters on the
this software and the leadership and
very much so. The issue of disasters on the African continent and their poor or questionable management is not detached from the other issues that afflict Africa. For the simple reason we've said repeatedly that the software that we are operating cannot function in our favor. That is why, among other things, China at this time is fully focused on replacing the financial software. They are pushing very hard to have the yuan usurp the dollar. And I know they will achieve this, not in the medium term, for the simple reason that usurping the power of another is a process. But China, unlike Africans, long ago realized that working at the beck and call of the white man and expecting to rival him and then to overtake him is a fallacy. China has been redoing its approach, And that is why when China has its disasters, and it has its fair share, because China is a very large country, they have floods, they have mudslides, and those other things. But you really don't hear that the first, their first choice in terms of intervention is the International Red Cross. I really have nothing against the International Red Cross, but it's now for us as Africans to have our own interventions in place. When China has its own issues, you don't really hear that it's Doctors Without Borders that are first at the scene. They are good. You really don't hear that it's the United Nations that is at the helm of these relief operations. This is not by accident. These people have been working very, very diligently to see that they don't only take the place of the Western powers in terms of economic prowess, but they also want to project themselves in military terms. They also want to entrench themselves in diplomatic circles. They want to entrench themselves in every sphere that constitutes a true global power. Unlike the rest of us here in Africa, who are expecting that after we have read all the books published by the white man, we'll actually now replicate programs that are good for Africa. We have been thinking all these years that when we perfect the management styles that are well documented in Western capitals, we will now transform the lives of people in Togo, and people in Egypt, and people in Ethiopia, and people in Malawi. We are waking up rather belatedly to find out that you cannot function in another man's system and excel while he watches.
Sure.
China, through the BRICS model, is actively recruiting Brazil and actively courting South Africa, actively courting Russia, and Iran. Iran is not a BRICS state. Bangladesh.
They are pride.
These ones have already, they're actually already trading in the yuan. Bangladesh, we have Argentina even.
Even Saudi Arabia has applied and it will be admitted as a member of BRICS.
Yes. China realizes that you cannot be a true global power while using the dollar.
Exactly.
For us Africans, we believe that you can rise to the next level while using French francs as your dominant currency of reserve.
Yes.
That is a fallacy. As we talk, the International Monetary Fund is on record saying that 60% of all global reserve currency is actually the dollar. Exactly. In every central bank under earth. I know now that China is on a journey to change that, to see that the most dominant currency is the yuan.
So what is the East African doing now?
East Africans, it's not very clear to me if they have a policy. Actually, that brings us to where we were. If we have the East African standby force to come in when there is military conflict, where is the East African standby disaster mitigation force? That
we have
tells
the IGAD. The IGAD is there.
Has it meaningfully intervened? Okay, we have issues now.
Oh, yeah.
No. Not in theory now. I'm talking about being the one providing the tents in DRC, the ones providing the medical interventions. They're there? In that way?
They have limitations. IGAD, of course, has limitations, especially on the aspect of finance, just to borrow one.
That is what I was saying.
But the truth of the matter is that IGAD has done a good job.
No, we are not saying they have not. What we are saying is that the chief problem is that we have been trying to do our best within another man's system. It is not possible.
Yeah, because even as we speak now, talking about the standby force, it's like when you are having your robe, your clothes.
Maybe also to give you information that SADC is also sending armed personnel in the DRC.
You're talking army again. I would want to hear which African countries is providing tents, which one is helping to build a village to resettle people.
I think one of these days,
until when?
One of these days we will be discussing about the security situation in the east of Congo, and if the interventions, military intervention is going to be a solution. You remember, we had this at one point sorted when Tanzania brought in the forces and the other countries.
But the software is all wrong, so
exactly.
it will recur.
So is this military intervention the solution to
No,
the
it is
problem?
not.
But when you look, when you look at the East African, the East African, for instance, standby force, and you look at the way, because they have got regular meetings, they have developed their own way of handling these interventions, which is not a script. Because there is a departure now, there is a progressive departure.
Yeah.
It is not dramatic and dramatic in the sense that it is not so radical, because at the same time there are some funding which is done by the imperialists. But you can see that there is systematic, progressive, slow, all right, departure from the mainstream, where we used to sit back and say it has got to be the white man who is intervening on behalf of us. Because you know for a fact that in DRC it has been MONUC and MONUSCO, which largely you will find that the Bangladesh people, the people we are talking about in far as the army is concerned. And now we are also debunking the issue that has obtained for a very long time, that the army is that one that holds a gun and shoots and pretends, maybe like the case of United Nations forces, that they are doing nothing about conflicts, internal conflicts, whereas the elite, the 1 inch die. We are debunking that and having the army, for instance, the East African Standby Force, these deployments that have been made, whereby they, apart from protecting, the army is also supposed to provide some civic awareness, in arrangement with the country.
What I was saying, Ndugu Mututa, is that these arrangements are good, but they are still not what they should be. I don't hear anyone taking a bold step to revisit the sources of these policies. What informs the way we do things here in Africa? I don't hear anyone revisiting the foundations. Whether you build on a cracked foundation, and we are talking about 10,000 stories, that structure will come down. We in Africa have specialized in going about in circles. The problem of Africa, as you say, conflict, one of the reasons why people have so much conflict, and the case is also true in DRC, is sharing resources. It's part of it. Because the M23 say, okay, you're not giving us a part of the pie. And that is true in many other places. But why is that an issue? A country like China, for example, has a very, by the way, many people think that all of Chinese are really of Han descent. Most of the ones we see are Han Chinese. The ones who came and overtook the people they found there. There are many people in China among the Uyghurs. There are many people, Mongolia. There are many people who are not the Chinese we know,
yes.
but they have specialized in, they have poured all their resources into making sure there's unity of mind and purpose. If it kills you, you'll have the same outlook.
Now,
but we are not investing in that.
Coming to that, which force do we have in DRC now?
Which force in terms of what? This East African Standby Force.
They say there are some people from Sudan, there's some people on that force. There are people from Kenya, there are people from Uganda, there are people from Angola, I think. There are people from...
SADC has also been allowed to send in some force. But
yeah, I think
talking East Africa.
What I'm saying is,
it is East African Standby Force.
Even now, because of the complexity of nature of this conflict, the one will tell you, these are Ugandans, these are Kenyans. So we'll rather deal with this group more than this one. I was coming to your issue of unity. If we were to have an intervention force in DRC and
to plant trees, for example.
Yes, and sustainably do that, we need a group which is completely and purely East African.
Really?
That's going to be one of the biggest issues. Because now, what if it is an East African force, Rwanda has also to provide?
And they said no. They don't want
No, you see, at the end of the day, maybe let's clarify this. At the end of the day, although we say it is an East African standby force, at the end of the day, we have got a country called the Democratic Republic of Congo, and it has a president.
Exactly.
Now, all that is done is in conjunction and with the permission of the sitting leadership. Now, sometimes when a country has been deemed by the country inviting to be hostile, it makes no sense for that particular country to force herself on the country which is inviting. Now, I said that, and I don't purport to speak for the army, or be it Ugandan army, or East African Standby Force, or DRC, but this is information that is accessible, and we have it. It's not, it's in public domain. It's not really a secret. If it is a secret, it is an open secret. That there are countries, we know, that the sitting government in Kinshasa has said you are hostile. We have had situations where the ambassadors have been expelled or suspended.
Yeah.
Now, those ones have not been invited in this particular regard. And I think it makes a lot of sense that when the tempers are still high, we don't seem to be, again, fueling the escalation of the tempers. But what is also of critical importance, and I think maybe this is what Rachel was talking about, if I got her properly, is that, look, we are tired of the armies coming in and doing a lot of fighting and, you know, exchange of fire. I agree. But what is of critical importance, and you have heard our media here in Uganda and some sections of the happy social media people blame the UPDF and the Ugandan government that you are going into Congo and you are constructing roads, even when our roads here in Uganda are in a shambolic state. I agree to the extent that our roads, especially in Kampala, are in a very sorry state. And away from Kampala, we have got bridges being washed away. That is, you know. But you see, there is a Pan-African core. There is an East African core. There is another picture beyond Uganda, but which is also for Uganda. That we have got leaders like the president, our current president, who, yes, all right, Uganda first. And I think that was the dilemma, if you remember, going back into history, of the Osejefo, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, that he was thinking Africa so much that his detractors inside here, the imperialists, they took that advantage and they used, you remember one of the resolutions they were reading, they said that Kwame Nkrumah was going to use the Ghanaian forces to liberate the other African countries at the disadvantage, killing the children of Ghana at the disadvantage of the nationals of Ghana. That was one of the reasons. Of course, we know the reasons. Of course. But that was just a scapegoat.
Yeah, but again,
yes.
My point is, I really don't have any issues against standby forces.
Sure.
We are waiting for a day when these same people will bring resources and say, okay, at December last year, at least 120 people were killed in floods in Kinshasa. Forget that this one is in a war place, this latest disaster.
Yeah, yeah.
But who are these Africans who are presiding over cities where floods can kill 100 people? Who are these planners? In 2018, at least 500 people lost their lives in Freetown, the capital of Sierra Leone, to floods and mudslides. Who are these city planners? In Kinshasa, and in Freetown, and in Kampala, where the roads are in a sorry state. Who are these planners? They don't speak the same language.
You remember even in Mbale, we lost people.
They have never met.
Floods.
So what informs the disastrous management of public affairs in West Africa, Central Africa, East Africa? The only uniting thing is that we are on the African continent. It has to be that our software is messed up.
She's also raising another point, saying that why is it that Of course, we're now having, for DRC, this is something that we shall also talk about later. We have a standby force of the East Africa. We have the local forces of Congo. We are now pumping in another one from the IGAD.
What about the getting
SADC. From SADC rather. Yes.
What about the engineering brigades of these countries coming together, for example, where there is maybe like now, maybe the road has been washed away, where we're talking about. What about those same forces coming together for such causes? Why is it always in military terms? Isn't that a colonial script?
So
that's why we are stuck.
of piling up arms.
It is very colonial.
Yes.
Very colonial. And but when you come to civic works, saying, okay, let us now please engage.
In other words, you are saying that
as Tanzania, Uganda, and build a bridge in Karamoja, you will never hear that one.
It's possible to answer the Congo question without necessarily having to go with arms.
It's part of it.
No,
but it shouldn't be everything.
I think what we are saying, comrades, is one. Like I said, I do appreciate Takari's take on this, but we must be reminded that, for instance, what UPDF is doing now in DRC, for which the government of Uganda, some sections of Ugandans who like blaming have blamed the leadership, is that we are combining civic duties, like what we were doing in Somalia. It's not the first time, by the way. UPDF has been doing a lot of hard military protection, but also doing a lot of ideological orientation, whereby the civic duties being carried out to market people, the Wananchi youth, the police, the army. But when you go to Congo now, we are taking it a notch higher. And that was a private arrangement, by the way, between a country, because that was not part of the East African standby force. No. What happened is that the Ugandan government agreed with DRC, and it came in such a manner that the engineering brigade, because remember they had contracted with DRC to do the road from the border. But now, in the area where they are operating as UPDF, all those roads are also being made. You see, and the question is, I mean, and that one, in my opinion, also is a plus, because we have had DRC not opened up for a very long time. All the mineral resources have been taken out of DRC by the
But I think,
United
like
Nations.
Saying, I also believe.
I want to emphasize again.
I know.
And I really, for this one, I will not let Rugarama's argument stand. Yes, it is true that those things have been done. I want to emphasize that if we can find common resources for military issues, why can't we find common resources for civic matters?
Yeah, but
that is the question I want answered.
What Rugarama is saying is that in the short run, you need to have calmness. You need to calm down.
No issues with that one. No issues. There are cases where there is no conflict, by the way.
Yes.
Okay, away from DRC. There are cases where the issue is drought. And maybe that drought was caused by massive deforestation. Why can't we hear that these 5 countries pooled money to replant that area? Because really, when the temperature changes or the climate changes in your neighbor's house, it will also come to you.
Sure.
I am thinking, if minds are together on security matters, I really don't have issues with that. When will that same thinking visit other areas? It is not a question of resources. It is thinking and allocation. It is not that resources to plant one forest are not in East Africa. They are there. But allocation and the thinking to inform this argument is lacking.
So, okay, now what I was saying, if I may just complete my submission really, is that I have absolutely got no problem with the regional member states, among other things, doing the civic duties, if they can think about it and they adopt it as part of the agenda. And we, like I said, we have seen, for instance, the UPDF, the Ugandan government, extend beyond the military intervention merely holding the gun and protecting the people.
But that is Uganda.
But they have also, just a minute,
Alone.
just a minute. I have seen that being done. We have seen it in Somalia. There was parts of it in Burundi. We have seen that in DRC. But what is of also great importance now is that in the case of, you see, countries have got ways of carrying out their duties. Sometimes, for instance, when you look at Uganda, Uganda is, especially under this kind of leadership of Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, is one who believes in making sure that the mind is tuned to appreciate some of these things.
Are you saying
maybe
it's the only
also,
one?
no, it's not the only one.
But no.
But probably, I don't know, please, just a
I
minute.
know.
Well, the point I want to make is that if it is not at the heart of a system or a leadership to do civic duties, you are not going to take it as a top priority. But also, of what is of critical importance now in DRC especially, is that we have had a house on fire. Before you can talk about teaching children good manners, you know, how to greet neighbors, how to wash plates, you must first put the house out of the fire.
But that is not the point
And
of my
the
emphasis.
fire in DRC has been that people are dying. First, stop the death. And this is what the East African Standby Force purposes to achieve. Stop the menace of people dying. Stop ADF and other rebel pockets, the M23, if it is also categorized under a rebel pocket, and a multiple of them because they are there. First, stop them. After you have done that, there is a problem of roads not being open. In the case of Uganda and DRC, open up the roads. In the areas, we have agreed. But what is also of importance is that you are going to go. When you have gone away, how have you empowered the locals to carry on with the kind of development which you have put in place? Because at the end of the day, we are talking about East African region whereby trade is of great importance.
Of course, the other question will be, how in a sustainable manner are we going to stop these eruptions of these rebel groups after every 4 months?
That's the ideological thing that I was talking about. You see, let me tell you, when you look at those rebel pockets, what is the disagreement? For instance, if M23, for instance, are nationals of DRC, and the leadership is saying these are rebel outfits from DRC, I mean from Rwanda, the ideological revolution we should have is to make sure that the leadership in Kinshasa is told that these are nationals. There are supposed to be a way to harmonize, to have everybody live in this small part. What was the problem in Rwanda, for instance, that culminated into the genocide that we witnessed? The thinking that these people who are refugees that Rwanda, that's what the president said then, that Rwanda was too small a country to accommodate people who were already outside Rwanda. When they went back, didn't they fit? Are they not now there? But at what cost? So we are saying that if M23, for instance, among other rebel outfits, indeed, as we want to believe, are Congolese of the Rwandese extraction, because we have had migrations, we have had intermarriages, we have had countries which were artificially created by imperialists, or colonialists rather, now in turn the imperialists. Countries marry, you go to marry. They are different, you go to Nigeria. Everywhere you go, you will not find a homogeneous group of people living together in a given country. Now, if that is the case, therefore, and we have got M23 who are Banyamulenge, and they look like the Rwandese, and you say, after all, I think that is even a false argument, by the way. When you go to Rwanda, are all Rwandese Tutsis? The biggest majority are even not Tutsis.
But is it the problem in the looks?
Exactly. You've not been following these things. when you get into the argument of the Kinshasa government, by the way, you get into the argument of M23, they are being segregated, discriminated, simply because they are being considered not to be Congolese, that they are Rwandese who came from Rwanda and they are hiding into, although that is also, some pockets, by the way, is true. Some pockets, let me tell you, you remember during the genocide, there are groups that ran away from Rwanda and they went into DRC. But we also know, historically speaking, that we have got the Banyamulenge who are part and parcel of the Congolese society.
Exactly. But her point was, well, this
away from, I'm here so I can talk for myself. My point is, despite the effort to talk about the military side, my focus is not on military interventions. It is clear that the public purse of most African countries is too narrow to carry the burden of demands for social services. It has therefore been needful for a very long time for these same countries to pool resources for common challenges. My argument was, if you can pool resources to mitigate military conflict, why can't you pool resources to plant forests, resources to build bridges? If my economy is so small, but I'm part of the East African region, and we need a bridge from one side to the other, or a road, why do we still have to wait for IMF and in every respect? Of course, there are cases where we need them.
That's what President Ruto is saying.
Okay, so at the end of the day,
there is also the gauge rail.
What is keeping us, if we did not wait for Washington to assemble troops to intervene militarily, why are we waiting for London to provide the resources to relocate our people meaningfully? We have failed to exploit our own mental capacity, because we can compare notes and arrive at these answers as Africans. We're not even talking Africa. Let us talk about the region. I am saying this colonial script is the one that causes us to speedily find military interventions, and I'm not saying it is a bad thing. But when it comes to these other matters that don't involve direct conflict, we cannot find the willpower to avail those resources. And I am saying that this African superstate we're looking to provide cannot be achieved by any single entity. That is even why, giving an example of China, because it's the most important emerging power. Even for China to reach its ideals, it is aggressively courting other partners. We're talking about the BRIC states, because it realizes that it cannot achieve those aims alone. There is no African state that can deliver the sort of ideals that we've been waiting for. So the comparing of notes at every level is important. And I know we can do it because, like I said, when it comes to intervening militarily, we can find the will and we can find the resources. Why can't we find the resources when we hear that, for example, the people of whatever, need so many tons of food? Within our countries, we can find that food. Why do we have to wait for World Food Program, UNDP, UN this and that? Why? Okay. Why do we have to wait for EC? Those are questions we need to answer.
Someone from Entebbe is saying that, from the Pan-African Pyramid, saying people must stop attacking nature. Nature talks, and when it does, so disaster. Come look at what is happening surrounding the river Katonga, factories, rice farming, mention it, and the river can't breathe.
Rice farming wouldn't be a problem because it is part of the package, or it is recommended by NEMA. And there is a method they use for growing that rice, and even the type of rice. In my opinion, because I've been sharing with these NEMA people, and I've got some colleagues there, and some colleagues in UNRWA, what the problem is the unscrupulous politicians who have allowed the sand mining, which is underground, that brings the soils and the firmness of the structure on top to shrink and go down. Actually, what we're experiencing is partly because of the sand mining that we are talking about. Of course, that is not to take away the fact that also the soils have been weakened.
Yeah,
there is a lot. They have been weakened because of man's activity and unreasonable man's activity to go beyond even the recommended agriculture. Now, I just wanted to quickly run through, if you will permit me, comrade.
Yeah,
I wanted to quickly run through what we have just been talking about. With all due respect to our institutions, the truth of the matter is that I want to see and submit to our viewers that Africa as a continent has come from far. Right from what Kaisaka Same in 1904 presented at Columbia University, Regeneration of Africa, we have progressively been regenerating. When you look at the regional economic bodies, the SADC, the ECOWAS, the East African Community, when you look at other regional groupings like IGAD and what, they are not militaristic interventionist forces. These are regional groupings to do with trade and also to do with, when you look at the East African Community, for instance, what are we looking at? When we look at IGAD, we look at IGAD, which was formed for purposes of making sure that they do away or mitigate the climate challenges.
Sure.
It has nothing to do with militaristic, but at the end of the day, we know that peace is a panacea to development and so many other things. First, seek ye the kingdom of peace, and all the others will be added unto you.
But her
There
question...
are places where there's not been any conflict in living memory. Still, there is no progress.
There's no progress.
In fact, some of them are poorer than countries that have been at war.
Okay.
So what is the problem?
Sure.
So going away, Ngabo Gamienti, the peace dividend is important. But this software, I have to keep returning to the software.
I know. So next time, I think when we look at the issues of Congo as a subject, we'll look at all this, and then we can see where, and we'll also have discussions. I've seen also people sending in messages from Congo here, but I think we'll have time and now look at this exactly to see what is happening on this country. This one is sending us a message from Lilongwe, from Malawi also, but we'll look at it next time. I'm told now the office of, the manifesto people for the manifesto week ready, and we may have to allow them to now start off with that program, because it was supposed to have started earlier than this. And in fact, at one point we thought it will come even before we start, but I think there were some delays there. But finally, they are ready. And for now, I think we'll stop here, and we take you straight to the activities of the manifesto week to look at the NRM manifesto, the issues that have been able to be sorted, what has not been done, and they will tell us the way forward from here. And Ndugulu Garama, I don't know if you are going to join there, but I think too late. We'll just